Dave is back from his U.S. trip, so today we ask the question, what makes a good space museum?
Yep, expect high praise for some and rants about others. I've come back extremely opinionated.
What's your favorite space museum and why? Let us know via our social media pages at Space and Things 1 if you still use Twitter, and at Space and Things Podcast on Instagram and Facebook, or via the contact form on our website.
And don't forget to share this podcast with your friends. But right now, enjoy episode 121 of the Space and Things Podcast.
Oh my God! Unbelievable, but it is great to touch.
You're listening to Space and Things with Dave Giles and Emily Carney.
I'm Emily Carney.
And I'm Dave Giles, and welcome to episode 121 of the Space and Things Podcast. So, Emily, we finally met.
I know, finally. We've been doing this for almost 3 years, and finally we met each other in person. Just one note, Dave is very tall in person. I'm also very short, so that created a bit of a tragic height differential, but that's okay. I'm just kidding. No, really, it was really awesome to finally meet you, but it's weird because there was no first meeting awkwardness because we've known each other for ages, you know?
Yeah, it was very amusing. I picked Emily up from a hotel in Wichita to take us across the Hutchinson, and the other people in the lobby must have been very confused because the two of us were a little bit excited to be in the same room together.
Yes.
It was quite a moment. No one captured it. It was just for me and you. It wasn't filmed or anything like that, but it was just a really nice moment. We were both so excited to finally be in the same room as each other.
It was really awesome. It was worth the wait.
And how good was that event as well on that Friday night in Hutchinson, Kansas, that the Cosmosphere put on?
Yes, that was an event that I won't forget. It was an event for the ages. I'm still honestly emotionally overwhelmed by it, just because friggin' Harrison Schmitt jumped on the stage with us at the end of the event. My mouth literally was on the floor when that happened. I was just did that really happen? It was insane. Yeah, and there were so many legends there. It was just incredible.
It was such a great event. So for those people who don't know, it was called The First and Last Steps. The special guests included Apollo-era astronauts Fred Hayes, Charlie Duke, and Harrison Schmitt, who have all been to the moon. Charlie Duke and Harrison obviously have walked on it. And some mission controllers from that era as flight directors Jerry Griffin and Milt Windler, and flight dynamics officer Jerry Bostick, more on him in a little bit, and some shuttle astronauts Steve Hawley and Jeff Aspey. And we had a nice bit beforehand where we got to have a photograph, which Emily and I did put up on our social media, and meet a lot of people as well that were there. And for me, for the first time, meeting so many people who I've come to know over the last few years, but a reunion for you, Emily, a lot more than for me, with some of those people. And then we went through, and there was some food, and there was a silent auction, some wonderful things. Well, you were trying to bid on something. I can't remember what it was. Was it Lego or something?
Yes, I was. I was trying to win the Apollo 13 Legos.
Ah, yeah.
Lovell, Hayes, and Swigert. I wanted to bring them home. There's a long story. I have the Emily Carney Bad Bobby Lausma Lego set. Yes, there is one. Okay. It was very limited edition. It is in front of my television set, and I need to join her with Apollo. I need to join her and Jack/Bad Bobby. They need to show up together.
I'm sure that's possible.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, Fredo needs to swoop in with Enterprise and save her.
I'm so excited for this new Lego adventure you're going to have.
Yes.
I hope you film it. I hope you create some online content using your Lego characters. That would be amazing.
Yeah, it would be insane.
Going back to the event, it was just amazing. So there was a Q&A with the special guests as well, hosted by Jim Remar, who was on this podcast when we were talking about the 60th anniversary of Liberty Bell 7. Two standout moments. One was when Jerry Bostick was asked about Skylab. He called Skylab boring. And I was the only one who turned to look at Emily and see her face and get to enjoy that moment. I'm surprised you didn't scream.
Yeah, I was trying to keep it in. I was like, what the? I love Jerry. Jerry, if you're listening, I don't know if he listens to the show. I still love you, but I'm sorry, he's just wrong.
Fortunately, Milt Windler came to
Yes.
the rescue, didn't he?
Thank you, Milt Windler. Milt Windler is my favorite person. Thank you so much. Yeah.
Obviously, Jerry Bostick was talking more in regards to him being a flight dynamics officer and being in charge of orbits. He'd just been working on Apollo, working out trajectories for spacecraft going to and from the moon. Suddenly doing something in Earth orbit wasn't quite as exciting for him.
Not as spicy. Not as spicy.
Yeah. The other thing I take away from this, I mean, I really enjoyed Steve Hawley as well. I thought he was really funny. But Harrison Smith was just incredible. Hearing him talk was amazing. And I feel like I've greatly underappreciated him as a living astronaut, and now want to go and find more things of him talking. I was talking to Francis French the other day, asking him, does he have a book? Because I'd never heard if he had a book. I want to find out more about this guy. I want to get inside his head. I want to know more about his work and why what he did was important, because he just came across as so amazing on that stage, and I absolutely loved him being there. It was a real honor. I got to shake his hand, which was a big deal for me as well. So it was just an amazing event. And there's a lot of talk about the Apollo anniversaries. Okay, so I started something in Hipsters where I was talking about Apollo anniversaries, and this may come back later in this episode as well. A lot of people responded saying young people aren't interested in the Apollo program or what used to happen. And I fundamentally disagree with that. Mm-hmm. And I have evidence. Emily, you and I are evidence, because we weren't alive. We may not be young people anymore, but we were young people once who weren't alive when it happened. Yeah. And look at us. Here we are, right? Yeah. So I don't think it's impossible for young people to be inspired and amazed and in awe of the Apollo program. And I'd like to tell everyone about who I was sat next to at this event. So I was sat next to a young girl called Nora, and she was with her mum, and she was 12 or 13, maybe 14 at a push, but I think she was under 14. And she was there because she loves engineering and rocketry, and she builds model rockets. She's from Kansas, from the state of Kansas, and she builds these incredible model rockets, which are winning all kinds of awards. And a local businesswoman has obviously spotted that Nora has this amazing talent and is clearly switched on, and said to her, and obviously the family had been to the Cosmosphere many times, and she said to Nora and Nora's family, are you interested in going to see this event about the anniversary of Apollo 17? And they said, yeah, absolutely. So this local businesswoman sponsored Nora and her family to go along, paid for everything, and Nora was there lapping it all up, really engaging in watching these 80 to 90-year-old men talking about this trip that they took 50 years ago. And the next day afterwards, there I am in the queue to meet Fred Hayes, and she's standing next to me. By coincidence, we were in the queue next to each other as well. And she's so excited to meet Fred Hayes. And young people can and are excited about this if you let them be, if you tell them about it, if you engage with them about it, if you show them and tell them the stories, they can be engaged about it. And Nora was wonderful. She was a great person to sit next to her. I thoroughly enjoyed sitting next to her, and she was so engaged. And I think that people need to stop telling young people that they're not interested in something that we haven't made the effort to let them know about, or their schools haven't let them know about, or whatever it is. The Apollo program is exciting. It is fun. It's amazing, and it's still here for us to enjoy at the moment, even though they're really old. There's still living things going on. And this event and sitting next to Nora absolutely reminded me of that, and I thought it was wonderful.
It's like if you tell somebody that math sucks, if math is a bad topic, they're going to believe it, and they're going to do poorly at math, because they're going to develop this concept that, well, it's just too hard. I can't do it. And it's the same thing, I think, with aerospace. You know, if you tell somebody, well, young people don't like that stuff, you know, they're not going to be into it. You know, they're going to think, oh, it's boring old people stuff. And it's absolutely not. It is like the most exciting. I think Apollo Remastered, if anything, has proven that. I mean, this is still a hot thing that people want to read about, that people want to buy up. I don't think you can get a copy of that book anymore. Seriously, like that book is so hot that you can't find it anywhere, at least in the United States. I don't know what it's like in England.
It keeps selling out over here as well, yeah.
The minute I opened it, I was like, this is going to be a sellout because these photos are just exquisite and people are just, they're going to want to buy this. I mean, not just to have it and say, hey, I have this book. They're going to want it because it's a beautiful art book. It's beyond almost the program itself, if that even makes sense. It's almost sort of like a testament to what people can do.
I read somewhere recently, or I had a conversation with someone recently. There's been so many things going on. I can't remember exactly where this quote came from, but someone said to me, or I read, that the Apollo program was a slice of the 21st century halfway through the 20th century. And I think that's absolutely spot on. It was so ahead of its time and did so much stuff beyond what humans were capable of at the time. I think for many years people struggled to even comprehend what even happened, and I think there's a knock-on effect of that. But essentially, it's just as relevant, if not more relevant now than it ever has been, because finally you can almost imagine it happening. I think almost at the time you couldn't have done, which is really quite something. But yeah, I mean, you and I can go on about that for absolute days. Now, I know we've had a few people ask whether you and I recorded anything together when we were together. Unfortunately, we didn't get to do this. Emily was a little bit under the weather, so
yeah. I had an upper respiratory infection, and I did not want to spread it to anybody. Especially, I know Fred Hayes was doing a book signing that day. He is a very healthy man, but he's still in his late 80s, and my worst nightmare would be to give somebody like him something. So I unfortunately had to stay isolated that day.
Absolutely the right decision. And these things happen, so it really wasn't a big deal. We can still record like this. It's not like we haven't done for the last 120 however many episodes. Anyway, something I did want to ask you about is I believe that the week before in New Mexico, you got a tour of Spaceport USA.
Yes, I did. I will briefly discuss it. It was incredible. When you hear the word spaceport, you automatically think of maybe a couple places in the United States. You think of either Cape Canaveral, Kennedy Space Center, palm trees, all that stuff. It's kind of tropical. Or you think of Vandenberg, which is in the mountains. It's kind of foggy. Nobody thinks about New Mexico, but really, Spaceport America is incredible. It is in the middle of the desert. It's near Las Cruces. You have to drive a ways out to go there. I do want to say that they only have private tours only at this point. You can't just drive up there and be like, hey, I want a tour.
Yeah, it doesn't have a Kennedy Space Center style visitor center.
Yeah, so I think you would have to arrange a tour there if you were interested in it. And also, it's a working spaceport as well. And they have a working runway there. So if there's contingency landings there, people can do it. But it is amazing. It really is a 21st century spaceport in the middle of the desert. And the visuals look like something from the movie Dune almost. It's just, you have all this sort of space age equipment and you have a runway, this very large runway. I think it's roughly 12,000 feet, roughly the length of the shuttle runway, because one is meant for Virgin Galactic when their planes come back. And it is the home of Virgin Galactic as well. But also Up Aerospace is a company that does suborbital missions. They launch it looks like a sounding rocket, but it's a small rocket called the Space Loft XL, and they launch a variety of like research type missions as well. And it's really a full functioning spaceport. It's just on a different scale than, Kennedy Space Center or Vandenberg or something like that. And it's really modern looking and it's really beautiful. I had an amazing time there. I do have to say New Mexico is much different from Florida. It's very dry. It's kind of cold there. I did bring a jacket, but at first I was not used to that. And, I'm a little Florida girl, so the weather was kind of killing me. It was
no wonder you got ill.
Yeah, it was 46 degrees when I got there, and I hate saying it. I am a sissy when it comes to cold weather. Like, I will get upset in Florida if it's like 70. If it's 70, God dang it, it's like the Antarctica here. But for me, the visual part was amazing because you have a launch pad. It's not as big as, like, say, the SLS launch pad, but it's still a launch pad, and you have this gigantic landing facility in like the middle of the desert. And I think we're going to see a lot from it as the future goes on, especially hopefully next year when they start flying Virgin Galactic again. We've been hearing some news that they might start flying test flights again, maybe next year sometime. So
hopefully,
we'll
yeah.
be seeing more about it in the future.
Absolutely. Well, yeah, I'm a bit jealous that you got to go, to be honest. I'd love to head down that way. So hopefully one day I'll get down there. One more thing before we move on to the main section of this week's podcast. I mentioned Francis French earlier, but he's just done something very cool, which I think our listeners might be interested in. Obviously, as many people know, he authored a few books with Al Worden, the Apollo 15 command module pilot, and he has donated some copies of Falling to Earth to Novaspace to raise money for the National Ataxia Foundation. Ataxia is a disease of the nervous system with no cure yet. It begins by attacking speech and motion and can end in an early death. It killed Kim Poor, who ran Novaspace for decades, and now it's affecting his daughter, Kelsey, who appeared on this podcast a while back. Novaspace are the people behind Spacefest, which is held dear by many in the space community. The books are on sale for $50 on the Novaspace website, and they're signed by both Francis and Al Worden himself. Obviously, since Al's death, signed copies are finite, and this book is considered to be one of the best astronaut books out there. All of the money will go to the National Ataxia Foundation, and hopefully they can help find a cure or help to slow down the symptoms in time to help Kelsey and others like her. If you can't get a book, please consider donating anyway. I'll put some links in the show notes. But yeah, this is a chance to get a signed copy of Falling to Earth in order to also help out some good people.
Okay, so let's get talking about space museums.
As we approach the holiday season, we want to wish you a very Merry Christmas and all the best for a Happy New Year.
So, with Dave having just got back from the US, I want to know more about the museums he visited and then open it up to a bigger discussion about what we think is a good museum and why. So, Dave, tell us about the places you visited.
All right. Okay. So, I was over for, I think it was 10 days and managed to get to 6 different museums on this little trip. The first of which, I mean, it's kind of a museum, but it's kind of not at the same time. It's called the Cernan Earth and Space Center. It's on the campus of Triton College, which is west of Chicago. It's in like the western suburbs of Chicago. And this is essentially, it's a planetarium that run the odd show and feature, which if you're in the area, try and fit in. There was nothing running at the time I was there, and I knew that when I was going to be going, so I wasn't disappointed by that. But within the foyer of the entrance of this center, they've got some amazing stuff, predominantly Gene Cernan related, but they've got some other stuff as well. They've got his flown Apollo 10 spacesuit. So that's pretty cool. And they've got some really cool stuff, and it's all really well labeled, and which is really cool, as flown Apollo suits aren't that easy to come by. Anyway, everything they have is really well labeled, and you can figure out exactly what each item did and how it was used. And they have some QR codes that you can scan for more information, which I think were made by one of our Patreons, Ed, who also told me about this place. So thanks for that recommendation, Ed. What I was impressed with, though, was that despite the fact it was a small place and there was no entrance fee, although they did have a small gift shop, they had made a huge deal about the Apollo 17 50th anniversary. Obviously, Gene Cernan was the commander, so that makes sense, but they had actually done something. Some huge posters on the front of the building and little ones on lampposts around the campus. It just made it feel like they cared. So if you happen to be in and around Chicago and you want a bit of Gene Cernan or an Apollo fix, then head out to this place. There's a couple of other great museums in Chicago as well, the Adler Planetarium and the Museum of Science and Industry, which have some amazing collections. But this small little place is definitely worth a visit. From there, I drove. From there, I drove up. I drove up.
I didn't cry. I crowed.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I'm inventing words in English language at this point. It's all good. I drove up to Oshkosh in Wisconsin to visit, and I believe you've been there before, Emily, the EAA Aviation Museum. That's the Experimental Aircraft Association Museum.
I don't know if it was there while you were there, but it had the Frank Borman exhibit, which was amazing. You can tell that Frank had a ton of input, obviously, into that. He worked a lot with Chris Henry on it, who works for EAA. it's just awesome to see. I mean, Frank Borman, I think, is the epitome of the Cold War warrior of like, he really wanted to go the moon to beat the Russians, and he did it. So that's just incredible to see. And also the Joe Engle exhibit there, I was just dying over. I mean, Joe Engle is one of my all-time heroes. And I'm not a pilot, by the way. But as a non-pilot, I've talked to pilots who are like, this guy is like the best natural pilot I've ever met or worked with. And I mean, some of the memorabilia there that is on display, there's the knee board for the STS-2 partially manual reentry, which is one of the most badass things anybody has done in space history. Like flying the space shuttle, which was brand new, through a bunch of just manual maneuvers, and they had the knee board for that, basically showing, okay, this is what you're going to do at this point. And this is more aviation related, but I swear to God, I'm going to write about this and get sued by like 30 different people, but it's going to be worth it. They have the Voyager. They don't have the plane.
Yeah, they've got the cockpit area, the cockpit bay area kind of thing.
Did they still have the Dick Rutan and the
Burt Rutan
the brother outfits?
Yeah.
Yeah, this cowboy outfit. I was like, that's the only way to fly a plane. I'm sorry. If I ever did fly a plane, I would dress like that every single damn day because I'd be like, I'm just badass.
Yeah. The Voyager plane, for people who don't know, it flew around the world with a crew without refueling. That's right, isn't it? The first one to do so.
Yes. It was essentially like a large flying fuel tank.
Yeah.
And it had a very tiny crew compartment. And I want to add, and this is the part that's going to get me sued, is the two people in it broke up like the day before they flew that. Gina Yeager, not related to Chuck Yeager, and Dick Rutan, they were like in a relationship. And they like had broken up like the day before.
Wow.
And they had to fly. Yeah.
All around the world.
Yeah. I love my husband. We're very close. And I would murder him if I had to fly with him around the world. So I think one of us would kill each other. And we're very, so I don't know how these people did it with, having straight up broken up with each other. No, if you see seriously, me and Steve love each other, of course, but no, if you see the crew capsule, I mean, it is, I'm not a very big person. And
it's tiny. Yeah.
I got freaked out looking in it. I couldn't have done it. Like, I'm like, they must have shrunk themselves down, like lost a lot of weight to even get in there. So yeah, it was insane, but I'll stop. But yeah, there's a lot of incredible artifacts and it's enormous as well. So yeah, I need to go back to that museum.
Obviously, it's an aviation museum, not strictly a space one, but as Emily has already pointed out, they have plenty of space stuff. It's got loads of great planes and stuff that you think, that can't be a plane. How is that a plane? How does that fly? And it does. They have AirVenture, which is a big air display going on once a year. I've heard a rumor. Now, this is unsubstantiated. I've not spoken to anyone in relation to the museum, but I've heard a rumor that this year's show may have a space theme. That is pure rumor, and don't book it based on that. Maybe check it out, but I've heard a rumor that it might be space theme next year, so it might be worth one going to, or at least finding out more information about. So yeah, when I got there, there's a space hipster I'm sure you know called Anne Cedarquist. You know Anne, don't you?
Yes, I know.
Unfortunately, she is a volunteer at the museum, but she wasn't there because she was on her way to the Cosmosphere. She went down early to the Cosmosphere for the event. And Anne sent a message to Chris Henry and said, Dave's coming in, can you give him a tour? So Chris came out and gave me a tour. Now, Chris is the director of the museum, or one of the directors of the museum. Also was the co-host of a great podcast, which Emily was a guest on for an episode, the Apollo 13 Minute podcast, which, again, if our listeners haven't listened to, it's really, really great. Goes through every single minute of the movie Apollo 13 and gives you some stories about it and interviews key people, both in terms of the movie and the real event. Worth listening to. Anyway, Chris was great, and he gave me a little guided tour of the Borman and the Engel collections, and a couple of stories. The Engel one, it backs up what you said. Okay, so obviously Engel, before he became an astronaut for NASA, in terms of, as we know, that obviously flew the X-15, which was a space plane that did get a few people to space and have been given their astronaut wings since as a result, and he was one of those pilots. Neil Armstrong was one as well, although he didn't get it to space when he flew it. But Joe Engel did a barrel roll in the X-15 to come back in to try and slow it down, just to break some of the speed. And when he landed, he got accosted by one of the directors of the project. Said to him, "Joe, did you do a roll?" And Joe was like, "Yeah, I did." So yeah, you can't do that. I know you can do it. You know you can do it, but we can't be letting the other pilots know that that's something that you can do in this thing, because some of them won't be able to do it and it will go wrong. And it just shows, like, he didn't even worry about it. He knew he could do it. He was that good. He was such a great pilot. But Chris really pointed out that the beautiful thing about that exhibit is it's the Joe and Jeannie exhibit.
Yes. It's not just Joe Engle. It is Jeannie as well.
Yeah, so Jeannie was Joe's wife, and she worked at Mission Control at NASA and has her own Distinguished Service Awards as well. So it was great to learn about her. And the Borman collection is similar. It's as much the story of Frank's wife, Susan, who unfortunately passed away last year. And it's as much about her as it is about Frank. Susan was also a pilot, and that's really great to find out about as well. In my opinion, the story of Frank and Susan is one of the great modern love stories of our time. It's just really great.
And then you have the Voyager one, which is tribute to like the most destructive love story.
Yeah, exactly, right? So yeah, there's like they've got the opposites, absolutely.
You get the balance.
So within the Borman collection, they've got Frank's personal preference kit, which he took on the Apollo 8 mission, which included a photo of Susan, which he didn't take out of his PPK because he didn't want to get distracted. But he took it all the way there and all the way back, but he didn't take it out because he didn't want to get distracted by looking at a photo of his wife. And it's just such an adorable story. But they've got some wonderful artifacts of both the Engels and the Bormans, which I just think was amazing. It was some of the best collections I've ever seen. Amazing. Yeah. And it's all so well laid out and beautiful and all that. One other thing you didn't mention, they have a replica of Spaceship One and a wonderful exhibit that shows how that worked with big video screens. Yeah. So this was the first commercial space plane, essentially, what the Virgin Galactic plane now is a direct descendant of. So yeah, it's a great aircraft museum with some great space stuff. So yeah, if you can get up there, definitely do it. From there, I drove across to Sparta, Wisconsin, the place where Deke Slayton grew up, and I visited the Deke Slayton Memorial Space and Bicycle Museum. And it's run by Alyssa Young, who we had on this podcast not so long ago. And Alyssa was there, and I got to meet her, which is lovely. Now, this is a proper... I love these kind of museums. This was a proper small town hall style museum. It's in an old Masonic hall in the upstairs room, and they've got bikes around the outside and the Deke State stuff in the middle. Now, the two aren't related. There's not a connection with Deke with being an avid cycler, as far as I'm aware. But it's the nature of these kind of small museums that have to represent the local town. Sparta, Wisconsin, is the cycling capital of the US, apparently. Who knew? Well, I do now.
I do now.
Yeah, I do now. And it was this great, loads of cool bikes. But in the middle, you've got the story of Deke Slayton, and they've got some wonderful artifacts. We had Alyssa on before, and she talked us through some. One of his Mercury suits. Obviously, he didn't fly a Mercury, but it's still cool to see his fitted out Mercury suit there. Loads of handwritten letters, and some of them were super sassy and all that kind of stuff. Loads of personal artifacts. But it's a really engaging, small, local town museum, and they do some really cool stuff there. They have a space camp there for kids in the summer. They run for 2 different age groups, and they have a host of activities and guests for the kids, including Mark Lee, who is a shuttle astronaut from the area, which is super cool. This place is tiny. It's a small town in the middle of nowhere, and the kids get to see that Deke Slayton, who was once like them, became such a huge part of NASA. And also there's another astronaut from that area too. I mean, how inspiring is it that? That's just crazy. I wish... that more kids get to experience this kind of thing. It's museums like this which I also wish got control of the bigger artifacts. I wish some of the bigger things would end up at places like this, but more on that later. What Alyssa is doing here is great, and if you're ever nearby, maybe to do some cycling, pop in and show us some support. This is constantly trying to look for ways to improve the museum and update how the stories are being told and make them more relevant. It's such a great place. I then did a long drive long drive across 2 days to go out to another aerospace museum, the Strategic Air Command and Aerospace Museum in Ashland, Nebraska. So that was quite a bit of a trek. Again, mainly aviation, some missiles, that kind of stuff. But they've got a space section, which is the reason I wanted to go. The airplane stuff is all great. If you're into airplanes, you're going to love it there. You really are. A couple of big hangars with lots of cool stuff. The space section is, again, it's so well done. It's just a small area, but Ashland is in the middle of nowhere. There's a song by the Counting Crows called Omaha. Omaha, somewhere in middle America. And Ashland is like the next town along from Omaha. It really is in the middle of America, in the middle of nowhere. But there was an astronaut from Ashland, Nebraska, the only Nebraskanaut, Clayton Anderson, who we've had on. And Clayton is now the director of that museum. And I don't know whether the space section was there before he took over on that role, but it's a very cool section of the museum. It does a great job of telling the story of spaceflight using a few artifacts, loads of really cool photos, and some pretty decent-sized set-piece displays. It also has a great interactive exhibit all about black holes, which is pretty cool. But then you've got this area which teaches people, and again, it's similar, it reminds me of the Deke Slayton thing. If you're from Ashland and you turn up there and you see this exhibit, which is all about this guy from your hometown and his time he spent on the International Space Station, and there's his spacesuit that he wore, and it's the most beautifully displayed spacesuit, especially the Russian Soyuz spacesuit, that I've ever seen. It's so beautifully displayed. And finding out all about his story, and Clayton is, he'll tell you his story if you ask him about it. It's a wonderful story because he just worked really hard. And he, you know, as we had him on and we spoke about, he was rejected for being an astronaut, 18 times, but he never gave up.
18 times.
Yeah, it's something ridiculous. So again, having that there, that little exhibit about the hometown boy and what he achieved is amazing. But if you happen to be driving through Nebraska, it's definitely worth checking in on. And then I went to the Cosmosphere. The Cosmosphere is without doubt the greatest space museum of all time. It just is.
Yes. And I'm sick I didn't get to see it this time, but I will again.
You will.
I will be back there again.
You
I
will.
have airline credit, so I'll be back there.
There you go. I mean, it's just ridiculously good. It's just ridiculously good. And they're still updating it. It was different from 2019 when I was there. They've updated the V2 and the V1 section and all that. They're updating things all the time. But you're talking about a museum, again, in the middle of nowhere, and there's the whole argument of why is it in the middle of nowhere, when their answer is always, why not? But they do it so well. Yeah. When you've got a museum which is doing it so well, they've got great artifacts. Apollo 13 command module, Gemini 10 capsule. Currently, they have the Liberty Bell Mercury capsule, and they do send that out onto private displays. But they've got so many great artifacts there. A ridiculous amount of good artifacts. They have the backup Sputnik.
Wow. Like, how'd they even get that? Like, how'd y'all get that?
Do you know what I mean? Like, the backup, the one that would have flown if the other one blew up.
Yeah. Like, how'd y'all get that? That's crazy. It's a game.
It's so crazy. It's so crazy. But it's not only have they got it, they've got it well labeled. Really, they tell the story of spaceflight, the history of it. The way you walk through and they tell the story of it is just, it's just so good. And everything's punctuated with really good artifacts, but it tells the story. And they don't gloss over the bad bits either. They make you very aware of all the bad things that happened on both sides, the bad practices. They don't shy away from any of that. Maybe because it's not an official NASA place. They can do that a little bit easier. But they don't shy away from saying when things were bad. And also, the outreach that this museum does in the local community and the wider world is amazing. The way they connect with what is going on. Follow them on Instagram. Follow them on Facebook. Even if you can never get out to Hutchinson, Kansas, go on the Cosmosphere socials because you're going to learn stuff. They do great outreach. It's amazing. So another thing I would recommend, if you're traveling across America, have a look at where the presidential libraries are. They're really interesting. If you're into history, they're really, really cool places. On this trip, I was able to go to the Lyndon B. Johnson one, which is in Austin, Texas. In the past, I have been to the John Kennedy one, the Richard Nixon one, and the Ronald Reagan one. They're all really, really cool places. And if there is ever a space story that happened within a presidency, there will be space artifacts. There will be something to tell the story of that. And of course, Lyndon B. Johnson, LBJ, was such a huge part of the Apollo program and getting that off the ground and getting NASA funded early doors. He was really integral in all of that. So, of course, there are some artifacts here. Not as many as I would like, but it's still cool. Definitely worth checking these kind of places out. They're not space museums, but if you're a history nerd, they're always cool as well. They can be guilty of telling the story of that presidency as they would like it to be remembered rather than what really happened. But actually, on the whole, I think they've been pretty fair to the presidents that they're portraying, warts and all, to an extent. But I think that makes it interesting if you go in with that thought process as well. So my final stop, and yeah, I've been talking a lot, was...
No, you're fine. You're fine. This is fun to hear.
Was Space Center Houston. Now, people need to be aware that Space Center Houston obviously is a visitor center next to Johnson Space Center, but it's not Johnson Space Center. These are two completely different entities. But if you want any access as a member of the public to Johnson Space Center, you have to go to Houston Space Center unless you know someone, right? So essentially it's a museum and they've got wonderful artifacts, some of the best artifacts. But God, I hate how it's run, and I'm gonna be quite rude about it.
Okay,
it annoys me. I find it, and this isn't the only place that's like this. It annoys me. So I was there on the anniversary of the Apollo 17 launch. They have the Apollo 17 command module, and there was barely a mention of it anywhere, unless you looked really hard.
Yeah, that's not cool. You know, and I mean, they have the command module.
Absolutely.
And they have a lunar rover, you know, which is kind of, you know, that was what 17 was about, you know, and I always assume the scene behind America. If you've been to Space Center Houston, behind the command module, they have sort of a panorama set up, but it's like it's like a real panorama. But they have a lunar rover and two astronauts and they have orange soil in there from what I recall, but you kind of assume that's Cernan and Schmidt. It's set up to be like Apollo 17. Yeah. So yeah, that's really not excusable.
Yeah, there's one tiny little, I want to say it's 12-inch TV screen behind the command module, which normally has a video on repeat of Gene Cernan being interviewed about the mission, sat in that little spot, which is quite cool. And they updated it with on this day 50 years ago, this is what happened on that one time, and that was the only thing on the whole site. Now I know that they had an event on the 16th of December. I know they've got a gala in January. There was no advertisement for that anywhere. Yeah, there's nothing up anywhere saying one of our key artifacts is currently part of a major anniversary. It's such a missed opportunity to connect with people. Like, it's such a missed opportunity. And I can rant about this forever and ever and ever. And the Science Museum in London are the same. There's other museums that are the same, the bigger ones where they've got so many different things and they're trying to be lots of different things to different people. Just miss out on so many great opportunities to educate. And as we were talking about at the start about young people not being interested in the Apollo program, one of the reasons they're not interested is, they can be interested, but you've got to engage them. You've got to connect them. If there's ever an opportunity to do it, it's when you've got the command module there and you go, 50 years ago, that was on top of that rocket you just saw in that big hangar over there and blasting into space. This one right here. And there were 3 guys in it, and here are their names. And here's something about them. It's absolutely the way to do it. It's absolutely, you can connect. It's one of the moments you can absolutely use. And they didn't do it. And it's so frustrating.
I think that's not excusable, you know, and I like Space Center Houston. I don't want to make it sound like, you know, I'm trying to go off on them. I like going there. I like visiting there, but I agree. They should have gone in a little further with, you know, at least advertising their event or something like that, you know, to basically be like, hey, this happened on this date 50 years ago. And, you know, stuff like that. That's such an important mission.
It really is. And Space Center Houston, they've got great artifacts. If you're in Houston, you've got to go. You've got to go. It's amazing.
Area, I would definitely go.
You've got to go. But it's frustrating that it could be so much better. Towards the end of the day, they were kicking people out of the room where Apollo 17 is, and they were setting some tables up. And I said to someone, "Oh, are you doing an event for Apollo 17?" And he just went, "No, it was the IKEA Christmas party." IKEA, yeah, just it was a corporate thing, and the next day they had
their party there.
Yeah, yeah, which is cool. I get it. They've got to make money. The next day, again, 50th anniversary of everything, they didn't have any event there, but they did have the police doing a big convention there about drink driving. What? I get it. I get it. They've got to use their space to make money. I get it.
Yeah, they got to use their space to get paid, but still, that's kind of crass on an anniversary. Yeah.
Yeah. And so, as I've mentioned already, I did a post on Space Hipsters kind of moaning about this. And I actually had a former Space Center Houston employee contact me and say, this is exactly what it's like. It doesn't care. It only cares about making money and being a theme park. I just feel it needs to be better than that. I feel it's such a missed opportunity. I mean, let's talk about some of the things they do get wrong. Like you've got a Gemini near the Apollo 17 command module in the same room. You've got a Gemini capsule. It's the Gemini 5 capsule, and they've got it hanging up, and they've got 2 models in there around it. One is inside, it's Gordon Cooper, and then they've got Pete Conrad outside doing a spacewalk. Now, that didn't happen on that mission. I know that might seem like I'm nitpicking, but it didn't happen on that mission. And I understand that they're trying to show one of the objectives of the Gemini program, spacewalking. First time America did spacewalks. Yeah, this is cool. I get that. But that capsule had its own mission objective, of which is completely ignored. They spent 8 days. That crew spent 8 days, nearly 8 days, in that capsule. 8 days or bust was the mission slogan. I think that could connect with people. Imagine spending 8 days with one other person in something that size. I think that could be just as powerful. And bear in mind, that was the mission of that capsule. It's things like that that just confuse me and frustrate me. The ex-employee also told me that a lot of the people they employ to do the tours and things like that, they're straight out of school. There's nothing wrong with being straight out of school, but they don't give them any specialist training. Now, let me tell you 2 stories of why that's probably not the best idea. The first time as an adult I went there was 2019. It was the anniversary of the landing of Apollo 11. I was about to go into the newly refurbished Apollo Mission Control. It's obviously in a building called the Christopher Craft Mission Control Center, and I asked we had some time before we went in because the group before us was in the room. Any questions? I said, has Chris Craft been here since it was renovated? I obviously knew he was very old. And the tour guide said, Chris Craft is dead. Everyone on that tour went, whoa, no, he's not. I doubled down on it. Yeah, he is. He's dead. In the end, he got his phone out and looked it up and found out he wasn't dead and had to apologize to everyone.
Oh, no.
And 2 days later, Chris Craft did die. I obviously then felt awful like I'd killed him, but that's a whole other story. On this trip, I went on the VIP tours. Now, these aren't cheap. These are very expensive. There's one in the morning, one in the afternoon. They take you to amazing places within Johnson Space Center, and it was so good. However, the tour guide, who on the whole was really good, but one of the stories that was told, we were in the Spacewalk section, the Spacewalk Hall of Fame, and she pointed at a photo of Ed White, obviously the first American to do a spacewalk, and said, look at the gap between the first spacewalk and Gene Cernan's spacewalk. That's quite a big gap between the first two. When you look at the others, the gaps aren't as big. And it's because Ed White misbehaved on his spacewalk and didn't come in when he was supposed to. And as a result, they punished the astronauts until they agreed to behave better.
What the
hell?
I almost said a cuss word, but this is a family show.
Absolutely, yeah. Right? Like, come on. That's so disrespectful to
Yeah, Ed didn't do anything wrong. I mean, when they said that to him during the EVO, it was kind of more of a joke. Like,
Yeah,
you got to get back in because you're having too good of a time, you know?
yeah, and it doesn't take much research or much training to tell someone that the reason there was the gap was there was no spacewalk planned on the next 3 Gemini missions, and the next one was supposed to be Gemini 8, but they nearly died. So they couldn't do it.
They almost died. So they had to come home. They almost died, so they had to come home. They had to come home real quick. Yeah, they didn't really have a choice, you know?
Yeah, so it's this kind of experience that makes me want to have the chat about what is a good space museum. And to me, it's about telling the story correctly and using your artifacts to inspire people and to tell the story and keep that history alive and inspire the next generation. That, to me, is what it's all about, and doing it correctly. But some of the big ones seem to neglect that, and they take it for granted. The ones who
probably have access to more money.
Yeah,
you know?
Exactly. The ones that should know better.
Exactly. The ones who have access to more resources, probably. Like, one of my favorite museums probably in the world is the American Space Museum in
Titusville.
In Titusville, right? It's by the Spacewalk of Fame. It's not very far from that.
It's a couple of rooms.
It's a few rooms. It's not very big, but it's got the most incredible collection of artifacts. They have docents there who actually worked, who were volunteers who actually worked on, the space program. I mean, they've had people who worked on Apollo, Gemini, shuttle, you name it. I mean, they've volunteered there, and these people know their stuff. They know their history because they worked there. I've seen stuff there at that museum that I mean, you just would not see you're just not going to see it anywhere else. It's not chintzy or anything, but it's not very big. It's not, they're not a Smithsonian type institute. They're not, they don't have, a gigantic archive with like tons of, stuff in it, but it's just incredible. They have the thruster from Gemini 8 that went bad. I mean, come on, that is nuts. No other place kind of boasts stuff like that, but that museum has soul. It's got soul. That's what makes it different to me from like some other places that are more, I hate using this word, corporate, I guess, corporately run. They've got a soul to it where, the people there really care about what they're doing. They really know their stuff because they have that passion because they worked in it, and I feel like that's the difference, between, and not to slam Space Center Houston, I've had a lot of good times there, but from what you told me, I'm like, yeah, that's probably about right. Probably nobody thought about, there's a big anniversary this week or anything like that, or thought to advertise that there was a big anniversary and, hey, we're having events coming up for it. Go check this out, or go look this up.
So they had this big Christmas lights thing that we're doing in the evening. Again, you pay extra to go and walk around it, and it's nice, Christmas lights, right?
Huntsville has something kind of
and it's cool. Like, I get it; those kind of events are good for the places like this, and it's going to bring people in. But there wasn't a single part of that. Bear in mind what's going on for most of it. There was about the Apollo 17th anniversary, and it just, again, it feels like a missed opportunity. Just have a little bit of your light show about Apollo 17. They're building these light shows. They've got Buzz Aldrin standing on the moon. They've got all these things. Like they're building this stuff. Just build another one for Apollo 17. It's one of your artifacts. Like, connect with your what you have got there. Like, and the anniversaries around it, when it's just so frustrating. I know there are also good volunteers there. I know there are good people there. I know there are good tour guides. I know that.
Not slamming everybody that's there.
Absolutely not. Absolutely not. And don't not go, because it's also really good. And the access you get on the tours is amazing. I got to see the neutral buoyancy lab. That's amazing. I got to go into mission control and see things going on the ISS from mission control while I was standing there. Watch a sunrise on the ISS from mission control. I got to experience that. There's nowhere else in the world you're going to do that unless you go to Space Center Houston. It's an amazing place.
Yes, it is amazing.
But I think places like Space Center Houston often take it for granted that people are going to come anyway because they've got that access, because they have these incredible artifacts, because Houston is Houston, we have a problem, so on and so forth. Of course, people are going to come who are interested in it. People are going to spend their money. But if they're asking for the amounts of money they're asking for these things, then also those people like me, have the right to get annoyed about it and have a right to vent their frustration at the fact that it doesn't feel like they care or that they're doing it correctly or for the right reasons.
Yeah, you could do better. Exactly. And I think it's okay to criticize constructively. And I think that's what we've done here.
Yeah.
Criticize constructively, okay, this is how you guys could market yourselves a little better, and maybe you guys could, switch up your content strategy a little bit. That's how I look at it. As somebody who does stuff like that, I'm always like, okay, this is how they could enrich their content that could appeal to broad numbers of people, not just people who are space geeks, but also kids.
Kids, next generation.
Yeah, young people who I definitely think would think this is cool because they went to the freaking moon, I mean, come on. My niece and nephew, they're teenagers and they're not really into space stuff, and I don't expect them to be. But when they see the Apollo stuff, they're like, whoa, they went to the moon. I'm like, yes. Yeah, this has happened before any of us were born, before I was born, and it's really cool that they did it. And, they're not obsessed with it, but they think it's cool. And I think, it could appeal to a lot of different people.
Yeah. Yeah. So, listeners, if you have a favorite museum, if there's a museum you think is doing something really good near you that we should be shouting about and talking about, let us know, because we will. I think praise should go to museums who are doing it well, and the ones that aren't, I'm happy to help them. If they want to reach out to me and say, give us more feedback, I will do it. Every time I filled out their feedback form and I've told them what I've thought, both the times I went, I didn't hear back from them to say, we're sorry that the slight things you're talking about, which were big deals, weren't dealt with. And it doesn't feel like they actually care for feedback, and which again is quite tragic when they ask for it as well.
Yeah, we're willing to work with you guys and talk to you about what we think, in a constructive way. I don't think anything we've said here is, offensive or, needlessly critical. I think not acknowledging that anniversary during that time at a major space center is kind of messed up, that's all. I don't think that's overly critical at all.
Yeah. Also, don't think they should sell a t-shirt saying failure is not an option with a picture of the space shuttle on. But,
Oh, yeah. Oh,
their oversight is, it's lacking. Can do better, but still go. Anyway, let's move on.
Roger, we've been trying to talk to you for a while here.
So, Emily, cast your mind over the last few weeks. Has anything caught your eye that you'd like to talk about?
It's incredibly stupid. What caught my eye was John Young looking like a member of Little Feat in Apollo in Real Time, Apollo 17, 1972. There's a picture that Ronald Purviance, I think I'm saying your name right. If I'm not, Ron, I'm very sorry. But he put it up on Space Hipsters. It was a screenshot of John Young in Mission Control during Apollo 17. I knew he had a mustache during that time, but this child got just hit by the 70s with a bat. You got to see this picture, y'all. I have it on my personal page, but it's in Space Hipsters, and he's got a mustache and he's got a cigar. He hasn't combed his hair in a minute. I mean, I don't know what's going on in this photo. He's got a turtleneck on. It's basically peak John Young.
He's got his credentials hanging off his turtleneck as well. They're clipped to the turtleneck, aren't they?
Yeah. And everybody's like, he looks kind of like a clown like this, but he still looks cool because he's John Young, I mean, anybody else looking like that would probably look like a clown. But he looks he just looks like, yeah, whatever. I showed up like this. Y'all will get used to it. And they did. So yeah, y'all, I'm just amazed that this guy was the most, I don't know if the most, but one of the most accomplished astronauts by 1972. And he just shows up in Mission Control, not a comb in sight.
Yeah.
Nope.
Love it.
That's what I noticed. I'm sorry.
It's amazing. That's what this section is all about. Sometimes it's going to be like that, and I love it.
So, Dave, what caught your eye over the last few weeks?
Okay, so on my flight out to the US, I downloaded the Amazon movie Goodnight Oppie. Oppie. I don't know, OP. And this is about the Spirit and Opportunity rovers that were sent to Mars. And oh my God, my eyes were hurting. My nose was hurting. My tear ducts were stinging. It was so beautiful. I loved it. I kind of felt like I had to apologize to the people sitting around to me because I was uncontrollably sobbing. Slight overreaction. It was intense. I loved it. I absolutely loved it. So please go and watch it. And I think the reason I wanted to bring that up is because this week we have also found out that the InSight lander is also about to say goodnight and is shutting down and it's covered in dust so much that its batteries are too low now. Having completed 1,445 Mars days, sols as they're called on Mars, InSight stands for the Interior Exploration Using Seismic Investigations, Geodesy and Heat Transport. You can see why they called it InSight. Yeah. So it was designed to give the red planet its first thorough checkup since it formed 4.5 billion years ago. It is the first outer space robotic explorer to study in depth the inner space of Mars, its crust, mantle, and core. There's a team of 25 to 30 people who have been working on it. It's detected more than 1,300 Mars quakes since its touchdown in November 2018, and its life is about to be over. Thank you, InSight. We've learned so much from you, and I'm sure the data that we've got from this is going to be poured over for many years to come as well. It's always a shame when we lose one of these things, but they're never going to last forever. They're living in harsh environments, and it's not like we can just pop out and service them, and they always seem to do better than expected. On the whole, so it's a testament to the team at JPL for how long this thing has been operational, and all the partners who are involved in the InSight lander. So yeah, good night, Oppie. Great movie, and unfortunately, the end of the NASA InSight lander. They're the things that I have noticed in the last couple of weeks.
And from the crew of Apollo 8, we close with good night, good luck, a Merry Christmas. And God bless all of you on the good earth.
Okay, that's it for this week. Thank you very much for tuning in. Next week, we're doing our 2022 roundup. And the week after that, we'll be previewing 2023. And we've got a very special guest joining us to do that.
Thanks for listening. And thanks to those who continue to support the podcast. We've had a couple of new signups on our Patreon page, which is always lovely to see. Head over to patreon.com/spaceandthings to get involved on there, or head to spaceandthingspodcast.com if you'd like to get one of our t-shirts, pins, or patches. But don't forget, in space, no one can hear you me.
Space and Things has been brought to you by And Things Productions.